Hello, my name's Olurotimi Osha. I like talking about history. I talk about world history and talk about American presidents. Today, I'm not talking about American presidents, but I'm talking about uh, the unfortunate um, state of mental health in the U.S. Of course, not too long ago, and President Donald Trump posted an image of himself as Jesus, while not a substantial portion of Americans thought that was delusional. It's interesting that I saw a commentary on a commentary by a guy called David Wilcox on his YouTube channel. I don't follow the guy. I don't, I never really knew anything about the guy until I read of his unfortunate demise through suicide after a standoff with Colorado Sheriff's Department. Um, he had a standoff with Colorado Sheriff's Department after they'd been called on a mental health crisis call, so an emergency crisis. Now, it's interesting, of course, I've been doing videos, I've talked about how Montgomery County Police and a guy called Jide Wari fabricated a mental health crisis at my home. So it was staged. I've done many videos explaining what happened. So it was supposed to be some kind of that I was supposed to be going through either a mental health crisis. Jide Wari had gone to file an emergency evaluation petition that I was not aware of. My family was not aware of, and he didn't live in my home. I lived in my home alone. I wasn't going through any mental health crisis. So that was an example of a swatting. Now, considering that, my own situation, that I know that, well, Montgomery County Police, the Montgomery County Police, that's in Maryland, not Colorado Sheriff's Department. Considering I know that they fabricate and stage crises that never occurred, right? That they file false police reports and incidents, right? They fabricate and engineer incidents. Like in my case, I was a victim of their fabrications, right? I'm fortunate that I'm alive. I lived to be able to tell my story of what happened, right? I was shot in the head, um, you know, by one of the police officers, Jeffrey Ray. That's what my attorney told me from watching the body cam, right? So it was a staged incident. Uh, it's made me take any reports of a standoff with a grain of salt, especially if um, the um, the subject was killed, because we don't get to hear their side of the story. I've been doing videos and I've been able to tell my side of the story that, well, I was never in any standoff with the police. The police locked me in. I was falsely imprisoned, and they fabricated an emergency. I was working in the federal government. They may have done it to cover up something I had reported because there were ongoing federal investigation. I'm lucky I'm alive. I'm fortunate. I'm blessed that I'm alive to tell my side of the story. It's made me skeptical, right? When I hear that somebody was involved in a standoff with the police, but they got killed because we don't know their side of the story. We can't take what the police says at face value. We know that there are many crooks, there are many criminals, there are many bad actors, rogue agents that have infiltrated various police departments in the nation. There was not too long ago, a few years ago, a couple of years ago, under Governor Larry Hogan, his chief of staff was supposed to have been committing fraud, right? Writing fraudulent checks. And he was killed in a standoff. He was this Jewish guy. And we don't know his side of the story. We don't know what really happened. We don't know if he was doing that, perpetrating the fraud through the authorization of another principal. We don't know, right? They said he was under investigation. He had been committing fraud. We don't know. But now they could put all the blame on him because he's a dead man. He was killed in the standoff. We don't know if there was really a standoff, right? Um, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but just again because I've been wrongfully mischaracterized as having been in a standoff with police when I was not, when the police engineered a swatting, right? And I've done videos explaining that. Today, I wanted to talk about this guy called David Wilcock, right? David Wilcock was apparently killed. Well, he actually killed himself. According to Daily Express, because I read the news on the Daily Express on April 20, 2026, so just about 5 days ago, he killed himself. Uh, he took his life after being involved in a standoff. The sheriff's department in Colorado, they had called for a due to a mental health crisis. He was supposed to have been going. He was supposed to have been experiencing, and he the apparent reason, the ostensible reason is because he was going through depression and heavy financial debt, and that's why he ostensibly took his life. This guy, David Wilcox, when I read the article, he was described as an actor and a writer. I saw his YouTube channel video in which just the day before he apparently took his life, I think just the day before April 19th or so, he did a video and it was satirical um, on President Donald Trump's, uh, you know, misrepresenting himself delusionally as Jesus Christ. And so he had commentary. He was doing these satirical, uh, you know, attributions on, on Donald Trump. And he has a huge YouTube channel, like over 500,000 followers, over 500,000 subscribers on YouTube. By the way, he also does, he's late now. He used to do, he was involved in various History Channel episodes, about 80. He did about 80 episodes that deal with paranormal activity, things that have to do with aliens. So he's involved in these weird, he used to be involved in these weird conspiracy theories about UFOs and aliens. And he would spin all sorts of conspiracy theories about 9/11, that it was some aliens who were involved in the 9/11 attacks on New York. So I would have just dismissed him as, well, somebody uh, who was spinning these alien conspiracy theories, UFO theories, just because there's a market for it, right? There's a market for it, and it was a way he made his income. Not that I thought that he was delusional enough to believe his weird projections about aliens, because stuff he said was outright delusional, right? If you believe those things, and he had a severe mental illness, he's delusional. But the thing is, in America, there are these people who are called the Star Trek generation, Star Trek aficionados, and you don't know if, Star Trek and, sci-fi, uh, science fiction, it's entertaining. But to imagine that there's actually a segment of Americans who believe in these things, right? That's severe mental illness. That's a mental disturbance, right? They have all these weird conspiracy theories about aliens and UFOs. And so this guy, David Wilcox, was apparently interested in, spinning various conspiracy theories that, UFO scientists, people are being killed, are being abducted and killed because of what they know and things like that. Um, but interestingly, right? Interestingly, there's another aspect that's interesting about this David Wilcox guy. Apart from his um, profiting off the propagation of false UFO claims, right? Weird, delusional UFO claims. Apart from that, um, he was allegedly involved in a DOD Ponzi scheme. There's a company named it's Stavati or something. I'll correct it, Stavati Aerospace, and he was supposed to be director of advanced technology, right? Director of advanced technology of this Stavati, and it's supposed to be a DOD contractor, right? They were supposed to be making um, aircraft for the Department of Defense, the Pentagon. It turns out that this company, since its inception, has not built a single um, aircraft. They ostensibly raised $1.5 billion, right? $1.5 billion. They've not built a single aircraft. And they were apparently being sued by one of their investors as a racketeering, fraud, and Ponzi scheme, right? It's interesting that this guy who, just, the term is unalived, or committed suicide. And I'm not trying to be dismissive, but, there's been a spate of violent killings in America, right? Um, it's interesting that he was the director of advanced technology, this Ponzi scheme, right? That it's been described as a Ponzi scheme, and it's supposed to be affiliated with the Department of Defense. He, you would imagine that someone who's director of uh, advanced technology, right, of an aerospace company, right, that manufactures, that's supposed to manufacture aircraft for the Department of Defense and the Navy, right? You'd expect that he has an engineering degree. So when you look at the profile of this guy who spins conspiracy UFO theories, that's what he's known for, actually, right? He writes on UFOs and aliens, this weird stuff, and you think he's doing it for entertainment. And claims he made, he believed he was a reincarnation of someone and things like that. They're outright delusional, right? Severe mental illness. Unless he's doing it for entertainment, then he's a fraudster. He would have been a fraudster, right? So you don't really know. But his biography, his profile, he doesn't have any engineering degree. He's never worked as an engineer. His bio shows that he graduated with a degree in psychology. He has just a bachelor's in psychology. He worked for a short time at a psychiatric hospital, right? At a psychiatric hospital. And I've been saying it that you'll find a lot of people who work in psychiatric hospitals in the field struggle with severe mental illness, right? So this guy, David Wilcox, obviously, they say, he committed suicide. You can imagine the people like him, supposed to be giving help, assistance to people who are apparently struggling with mental illness. It's like the blind leading the blind, right? He's supposed to, but he himself has a severe mental illness. And I've mentioned this. That's why there's actually a movement against psychiatry, right? Especially the way these hospitals and judges use these hospitals to dehumanize and strip the human rights of Americans, right? And apart from that, though, apart from the fact that this guy had no qualifications whatsoever, uh, in engineering. I mean, anybody can start a company. It doesn't matter, right? He could start a private company or whatever. But the thing is, he was involved in a company that was taking U.S. taxpayers' money. It, Savati Aerospace is actually listed as a DOD contractor. They're a DOD defense contractor. So they're taking taxpayers' money. And that's being called a Ponzi scheme. I need to dig up more facts, more information regarding this. But again, just in view of what's been going on in April, we've been inundated with mental health crisis, murders, violent murders by people struggling with mental health. Um, of course, I also found it interesting in the way the media dealt with this guy's uh, suicide, his passing, and the standoff. It's, Daily Express wrote this maudlin epitaph, right? Glowing, he was not demonized the way the former lieutenant governor Justin Fairfax, a black man, was demonized, was villainized. Of course, black Americans have commented that, maybe if he had just unalived just himself, if he had committed suicide, killed just himself without murdering his wife, he may have um, received more sympathy, right, from the public. The fact that, but again, we don't know if he, what mental illness or the drug abuse, we don't know how that played a role, right? But interestingly, like I was saying, uh, this guy, David Wilcox, who was apparently involved in a Ponzi scheme, who profited off, selling delusional ideas, conspiracy theories, fraudulent ideas. Uh, he's received with all these glowing encomiums, all these, maudlin epitaphs, right? He's not demonized, he's not villainized, that, this guy was a fraudster. And, we don't know if they raised $1.5 billion, what sort of financial struggles, you know, did he have that caused him, to go over the edge, caused him to actually take his own life. What again, we don't know. I don't struggle from mental illness, so I wouldn't know what somebody who actually struggles with mental illness, I wouldn't know where they are, their experience. But the thing is, um, these are the people who, of course, are dangerous. If they're dangerous, if they're struggling with these ideas, suicidal ideations, because someone struggling with killing himself could potentially kill somebody else, right? We saw that with the Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax, and like I'm trying to point out that the way the media has treated their deaths has been very different. There's a huge gulf, huge disparity, but of course, a murder is involved, right? The heinous killing of his wife, right? The way it all went down, especially given also the blowback of the sexual assault allegations that Justin Fairfax, was struggling with, since 2019. But um, Daily Express, which carried uh, the suicide of David Wilcox, it doesn't it writes, like I said, a glorious epitaph. It doesn't point out to the fact that David Wilcox was delusional. He was profiting over selling fraud, and he may have been involved in a Ponzi scheme. There are allegations that he was involved in a Ponzi scheme. By the way, talking of Ponzi schemes, if people don't remember, there was a guy called Bernie Madoff, right? Bernie Madoff, of course, sold the largest Ponzi scheme ever, right? And interestingly, was a $65 billion Ponzi scheme. It's the largest ever in the world. So he was a major fraudster. But the funny thing is, he was an established man. He was an establishment man, right? He was chairman of NASDAQ Stock Exchange. That's Bernie Madoff. He was chairman of the NASDAQ Stock Exchange. That's one of the major stock exchanges we have in the United States, right? NASDAQ, they're known mainly for tech stocks, right? And the reason I'm pointing this out is because it takes an inside man, right? It takes an inside man to be able to pull off a great Ponzi scheme. Now, this Stavati Aerospace, this company that's supposed to be a defense contractor, they're supposed to be getting taxpayers' money from the Department of Defense, the Pentagon. They have inside people at the Pentagon. They're direct contracts to them. that's not vetting them properly. They've not built a single aircraft, and they have as their director of advanced technology a man who's unqualified, who who's known for peddling falsehoods, right? Delusions, right? Regarding UFOs. He's not an engineer. He had a degree in psychology. He was a failed person who worked in a psychiatric hospital because he didn't have more advanced training or degrees. Of course, well, I guess the jobs that white men typically have access to is very different from, I guess, other minorities who have to go through years of training, actually invest in lots of education to be qualified to get a job. So I guess his experience was probably different. I don't know. Um, but my point again is that these Ponzi schemes have inside people, right? Inside people in the establishment. And it's not just one person, it's not an isolated person who's perpetrating these frauds. And this is where, where are our, law enforcement agencies like the FBI and the Department of Justice? What are they doing, right? What are they doing about attacking these insider jobs, insider threats within America, the Ponzi schemes in America? Why are they not getting them? Instead, they are more focused on racist and xenophobic attacks on minorities around the world. You hear them talking about the Nigerian fraud, but they never focused on the largest Ponzi scheme in the world, which was right here in America by an establishment man, Bernie Madoff. In fact, the government never got on. It was his family. It was he himself, his family, who, uh, you know, that exposed themselves, right? They exposed themselves because it was a Ponzi scheme, and the dominoes, it would eventually all crash, and that was what was going on. And they ran this Ponzi scheme, $65 billion. The FBI didn't catch on, the Department of Justice didn't catch on, the SEC didn't catch on, right? And I have this Ponzi scheme stuff out. It still exists. If you go and look at their website, they exist. They have a black guy. They don't. If you look at their leadership, all white men. They don't have. They don't even have a single woman. They have one black guy. I don't know if he's the token black man. He has experience 6 years in the Air Force, U.S. Air Force. He's supposed to be the vice president of DOD relationships, that's Department of Defense relationships, right? And the FBI, Department of Justice, has an opportunity to actually investigate them more to see what's really going on. Why did this guy, who just 6 days ago, less than a week ago, was still doing videos on his YouTube channel, right? And all of a sudden, he kills himself violently in a standoff. What's really going on? Of course, there are already all sorts of conspiracy theories by his followers online about what's really going on, and America is a land where they love to peddle conspiracies, right? Conspiracy theories. Um, but it's kind of interesting that the United States government, I mean, is it really the case that the United States government's military industrial complex is run or has been infiltrated by lunatics, right? Right, fraudulent lunatics, like uh, you know, like um, this guy. I'm not trying to dishonor his legacy or whatever it was, but the thing is, he was clearly delusional, right? That's David Wilcock guy. Um, but it's not I wouldn't say he's exactly an outlier. If anybody remembers Howard Hughes was the richest man in America, right? Howard Hughes was the richest man in America. If anybody's seen the movie The Aviator, done by Leonardo DiCaprio, he was acting as playing Howard Hughes. He did an excellent job. I thought he should have won an Oscar for that. Howard Hughes, um, was building. I think he was building aircraft for the U.S. government. He was the richest man in America, but Howard Hughes was crazy. Howard Hughes, he had OCD. He struggled with severe mental illness, and you could see that was what he was struggling with um, in the movie Aviator. They shed light on his struggle with mental illness, right? Um, Again, this is not me projecting sanism or mentalism, but it's concerning given the times. Who is running America? America has a mental health crisis, right? And it's concerning if the at the pinnacle, right, the apex of American power, there's the boardroom. If it's actually run by and controlled by psychopaths, fraudsters, and at the expense of the struggling American taxpayer. Again, Howard Hughes, he was I guess he was a major Department of Defense contractor because you can see he was building aircraft. He had these companies that were building planes and things like that for the United States government. But he was clearly right. He was a Looney Tune or whatever. You could see he was. I think he struggled with various forms of schizoaffective disorders. Severe mental illness, right? And and you look at this Stavati company. They're peddling these pipe dreams, these delusions about building aircraft for the United States government. These falsehoods. And all of a sudden, you see this guy who wasn't qualified in aerospace engineering. He was director of the advanced technology, and now he's committed suicide. We don't really know what the true story is. We don't know how much has the United States government funneled into the company that's been described as a Ponzi scheme. That's also a Department of Defense contractor. How much was funneled into it? What's really going on? I'm not somebody who buys into conspiracy theories, but I'm skeptical. You should be able to think reflectively and not just be impulsive and reflexive, which is very pervasive in America right now. Anyway, I'll continue with my discussions. My name is Olurotimi Osha. I'll keep you posted. Thank you.